Good afternoon and welcome to this session, Remembering Mary Gergen. For those of you who didn't know Mary too well, I will say a few words about Mary. Mary was a lively, courageous, fun-loving, joyful, humorous.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Can you hear me? Diane? No, she still can't hear. An innovative trailblazer. With Ken, she not only became an iconic academic couple, but also co-created a global community through the Taos Institute, a family of caring, committed scholars and practitioners whose central desire is to make the world a better place for all of us, something they share as a sister or brother institution with ISAN. The world is a better place because Mary was in it and because of the way she moved and lived in the world. Mary not only wrote about, taught about, and performed relationships, she provided a public example of how to live fully, energetically, candidly, and meaningfully. I don't recall any dull moments in Mary's presence. My impression is that she brought fun, joy, learning, and connection to everything she touched. Books that Mary co-authored, edited, and contributed to include Paths to Positive Aging, Feminist Reconstructions in Psychology, Narrative, Gender, and Performance, Feminist Thought in the Construction of Knowledge, Retiring but Not Shy, Feminist Psychologists Create Their Post-Careers, and Playing with Purpose, Adventures in Performative Psychology, which appeared in the book series that Carolyn and Tony and I edit. Mary inspired and for many years led the publication of the Taos Institute's free electronic newspaper as well, titled Positive Aging. Here are Mary's own self-reflective words about work and her life. For me, Mary said, my work and what I do and what I think is a form of pleasure. I do crazy stuff. I am kind of an exhibitionist and I'm very social and outgoing. When I found my own niche, the niche was this intersection of feminist theory and social constructionism. I started playing around with writing styles, sort of dismantling narratives so that there were different fonts and lines and intersecting other voices, making my papers polyvocal and the voices of the people I was studying, the autobiographies I was studying, and just being daring about it. And there's no stopping the kind of craziness that Ken and I can get into, but it's serious craziness, like finding out new ways of living together. There's one part of us that wants to simplify and slow down, and another part of us that simply cannot resist the next thing that's going on. I think that my greatest personal asset is my optimism, good feeling, flow, emotional nature, and I think I'm quite protective of it. So for Mary, it was about pleasure, doing crazy stuff, serious crazy stuff, playing around, being daring. Mary was what Clifford Geertz might have called an experienced near academic. She studied, wrote, and performed what she cared about, what mattered to her, and how she understood what it meant to live a good life. Here are some of the words of remembrance spoken in the aftermath of Mary's death by some of her students and Taos associates. One said, Mary won my heart because of her fierce intellect, engaging way of being, aliveness, and unapologetic critique of what needed to be named. Another said, Mary was inspirational and made me feel aspirational. Another, she was an advocate of silenced voices. I will miss her cleverness, quick wit, playful humor, and direct honesty. And still another, I love that Mary would advise me on my research and in the next breath, let me know what I needed to wear to dinner. As for me, I always made sure that my eyeglasses were pristinely clean before meeting with Mary. I learned she liked them that way. She and Carolyn and Ken and I shared many good times walking in the spring darkness on the quad at the University of Illinois, occasionally flashing back to embody our 1960s and 70s selves. When I had a freak accident and had to go to the emergency room in Urbana to get treatment for several broken fingertips, Mary and Ken stayed up late to greet Carolyn and me and comfort us with good wine and rich conversation. I am so pleased today that we could have some of Mary's closest friends and associates from the Taos Institute to speak. Our speakers in order will be Diana Whitney, Sheila McNamee, Frank Barrett, and then Ken, assuming he's able to make it here. Diana, is there any way to let Diana know if she's not hearing?
Send her a note.
Okay.
I just sent her a note, Art, and told her she
Okay.
can start talking. So did Frank. Hopefully she will.
Don't know what it would have cost.
Carolyn, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
I can't hear.
I know.
Just go ahead. Just go ahead.
Is it my time to talk?
Yes.
So I have missed Sheila and I have missed Frank.
No. We thought you were going to go first, but
Sheila, I thought you were going
Sheila?
first.
okay. Sheila?
You want me to go?
I can't hear anyone.
Oh, my.
Mm.
I'm happy to go, Art, if you want me to, and someone could send a message to Diana that she could go next.
Okay.
I will.
Okay. Art, that was a beautiful opening, and there's so much that could be said about Mary and so many personal stories to share. But in remembering Mary, I want to focus on many of the, well, actually the issues that you raised, the personal, the professional, and the playful. And I even have some of the very same quotes from Mary that you already mentioned,
Okay.
prepared.
They bear repeating.
Yeah, they are worth repeating. In 2004, Kip Jones published an article entitled Thoroughly Postmodern Mary, a biographic narrative interview with Mary Gergen. And in this piece, Mary is quoted as saying, and Art, you already mentioned this, for me, my work and what I do and what I think is a form of pleasure. So the personal, the professional, the playful, there are no boundaries among these important aspects of life for Mary. And to the extent that she managed to blur the professional and the personal, the playful and the seriously intellectual, Mary managed to simultaneously humanize and make relevant the academic study of social life, otherwise what we know of as the social sciences. For her, there was no boundary between research and everyday life. We can see this in her study of menopause, for example. She gathered her middle-aged tennis partners together to have a conversation about menopause. The results of that conversation, her research, appeared in her book, Feminist Reconstructions of Psychology, Narrative, Gender, and Performance, which was an important book because it brought feminism to social construction. And as Art pointed out, that was her niche, bringing these together. But more than giving voice to the feminist affinities with the relational orientation of social construction, this volume stepped outside of the mold of social psychology by also introducing performance as a valuable form of scholarship. However, lest we be too quick to categorize Mary's contributions as contributions to the academic understanding of social life, I'd like to point out that perhaps Mary's most bold contribution was the introduction of everyday social life to the academic study of human interaction. In other words, where most scholars hope to advance theory and research and perhaps maybe make the world better, as a side note, Mary dedicated herself to improving the world, making it a better place first and foremost. She did so in naming, for example, how we all move through our lives harboring what she called our social ghosts, the voices and presence of family, friends, enemies, characters in novels and movies, all identities that we can enact, borrow from, debate with. And in so bringing this notion to the fore, she invited us to deconstruct the traditional image of the singular coherent self. Let me address how the idea of social ghosts is just one idea and the polyphonic identity it incurs or raises help to improve the world. First, in acknowledging ourselves as multiple beings, it calls into question our impulse to judge. How do we know who or what we're judging and from what context? Historical, cultural, or local? And from where does any particular voice or action emerge? Secondly, acknowledging to ourselves as multiple beings invites curiosity about alternative scenarios in which we might be engaged, thereby calling into question our own certainty about what actually is unfolding in these interactions that we're collaborating in. If we think of Mary's work as a canon or an oeuvre, and the overriding theme is one of possibility and of potential, she played with form, as Art mentioned, challenging the dominant narratives, focusing instead on strength and positivity. She explored the narratives of male and female leaders. She found in reading the biographies of female leaders that their stories were fully embodied, whereas the biographies of male leaders were detached, more abstracted from the to and fro of everyday life. Embodied as a descriptor very much fits Mary herself. As one quite adept at theoretical discussion, she chose to pursue her research in a more embodied manner. I don't think the directionality of influence vis-a-vis embodied work was her study of women leaders to her own life. Rather, I think it was the reverse. I think her own blending of the personal and the professional, tinged as it always was with the performative, called her attention to these gendered ways of being. I believe that her own presence in the world, a truly embodied presence, piqued her curiosity and sent her searching for signs of embodied leading in others. And in calling attention to these distinctions between male and female narratives, she made alternative modes of being in the academy, being as a woman, being in the world, real possibilities for all. In an interview, Mary once claimed her feminism, quote, was not a commitment born of suffering as much as a notion of justice and more out of a position of strength than vulnerability. She passed that sense of justice and strength on to her colleagues, her friends, and to the generations to come. As illustration, she brought both justice and strength to our views of aging and retirement, something many of us here are happy about. Along with Ken, she produced the Positive Aging newsletter, which offered curated articles, anecdotes, news stories, book reviews, film reviews, and so forth that provided a vision of aging as a time of growth and potential, a direct challenge to the dominant view of aging as a period of decline. This generative view of aging served as well as a form of social justice by claiming a rightful place for the voice of older people in all forms of social life. There's a saying that goes something like, there's always a personal impetus for the topics we choose to study. Looking at Mary's choice of topics, aging, retirement, menopause, performance as scholarship, performance as a form of research, feminism, narrative, multiple identities, we can see a through line. Mary was interested in making the personal professionally visible. Her playfulness, as demonstrated in her many enactments at professional meetings, including the donning of multiple hats, the throwing of a boa around her neck, and performing, if at all possible, to imagine this a modest striptease at an academic conference. All of these performances brought issues of common concern to the fore. She humanized the study of social interaction, a topic that's been largely sanitized, neutralized, and universalized in academia. It's no surprise then that young scholars and feminist advocates felt seen and supported by her. She was committed to dismantling the canonical narratives that so often trap us, hoping instead to open space for intersecting voices for the polyphonic. I began these comments with a quote from Quip Jones' interview with Mary in 2004, So it seems fitting to end my comments with another. In describing her early years, particularly her teens, she said, quote, social life was just as important as getting good grades. In a funny way, I think this sentiment aptly summarizes Mary's legacy. She showed us all how to erase the distinction between the personal and the professional. If getting good grades is akin to being good or successful as an academic, and social life is akin to being laser focused on how we live our lives as multi-beings in a complex world, then Mary truly showed us that there's no need to choose between the two. Indeed, in my own embodied relationship with Mary, it spanned the gamut from colleagues to a big sister, little sister relationship, to family, to friends, to competitors, to co-founders, to co-conspirators, and the list goes on.
That was
That's-
lovely.
Thanks. There's so much more to be said and so many deeply personal stories, but I wanted to give space to the intellectual, the way in which Mary's personal life really contributed to the intellectual aspect as well.
Okay.
Art, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Would you like me to talk next? This is quite an experience. I have not heard any of the introductions. I am sure they were wonderful. Thank you. And I have not heard Sheila. I'm sure it was delightful. And thank you, Tony, for trying to get me auditory. So here I go. I have titled this Mary Gergen, Ubuntu. In the Sage Handbook of Social Constructionist Practices, Mary wrote of 3 genres of performative research. She talked about textual, embodied, and visual. I want to thank you for this invitation and need to say that participating in honoring Mary has led me to research her writings, reflect on 40 years of conversations, our many collaborative co-creations, as well as our special relational resonances. I now consider memorializing a form of performative research. It's an opportunity for reflection and healing. As I recalled my first meeting with Mary, I was actually moved to action to reach out to our mutual friend, visual artist Deborah Curtis. I am still awaiting her response. But imagine a small loft apartment, Center City, Philadelphia, 25 or 30 people eating, drinking, closely joined in lively conversations. I was writing my PhD dissertation at the time. Mary was pointed out to me by our hostess as another PhD student that I should meet. I walked over to introduce myself, and I encountered the most determined verbal banter that I had ever experienced in my life. Seeing no way to enter the conversation, I turned to walk away and bumped into Ken Gergen. After introducing ourselves, he was standing there smiling at Mary and at their mutual poet photographer friend. He introduced me, and thus began a lifelong identity casting friendship and intellectual camaraderie. Art, this one is for you. My PhD program was heavily weighted toward quantitative methodologies. I was an outsider, an older student interested in qualitative practice. And there was Mary, a beautiful, articulate echo. We were mothers who enjoyed sharing stories of our children, and whose lives gave our children much to talk about. Women who had been invisible in first marriages and were creating new social patterns for ourselves and for others. Feminist, social constructionists, and qualitative researchers. As Mary located herself in retiring but not shy, as a constructionist feminist, I have been in a minority position as a psychologist. As an advocate of qualitative inquiry, I have advanced ideas that are marginal and controversial for many trained in traditional empirical studies. In addition, I've been involved in doing performative work for 20 years, which is also an anomaly in the field. Perhaps an anomaly, but certainly a remarkable, accomplished woman. I recall Mary Gergen as a raconteur, an exceptional conversationalist. Daily life was performance. Always good food, beautiful artistic surroundings, stimulating people, reading, and activities. Mary was good at taking center stage. She was also good at sitting back and letting others be in the spotlight. She was encouragingly curious. What is it that makes you a good organization development consultant? Why do you think appreciative inquiry is so popular in Japan? When are you going to publish a book with the Taos Institute? Indeed, she later wrote that retirement was best when you are intrigued by something outside of your work. Mary's conversations were aimed at uncovering interesting social scenarios, at sense making, seldom at proving right or wrong. She practiced interpretive generosity, always positive, life-affirming ways of telling a story. The homeless person demonstrates resiliency. Graduate students slow to focus and write need support, searching for culturally appropriate processes and expressions. Always, she sought multiple ways to tell the story. As our friendship grew, so did our web of colleagues and companions. When I moved to Taos, New Mexico in 1989, Mary and Ken were among the first to visit. Mary delighted in meeting my cowboy dance partners and my Native American friends. We went to the hot springs in the Rio Grande River, saw a herd of buffalo, double rainbows. New Mexico showed itself as the land of enchantment. A second visit a year later included John and Anna Marie Reisman, friends and colleagues from the Netherlands. The conversation turned. Ken wondered, what if we invite others to join us? We could have conversations about social constructionism. We could eat good food. We could do all the things we like to do. What do you think? The seed was planted. Sheila McNamee, Harleen Anderson, David Cooperrider, Suresh Srivastava joined our founding conversation. In 1993, we gave birth to the Taos Institute. In my story, it was Mary who came up with the name. She suggested there is an Aspen Institute, a Santa Fe Institute. Why don't we be the Taos Institute? In my story, we have succeeded. We have furthering and evolving the theory and practices of social construction. The recent SAGE Handbook of Social Construction illustrates, and developing a growing global network of people. While we each brought an array of relational resources to the Taos Institute, a couple of Marys are worth sharing. In another place, she writes that she grew up the eldest and was the boss of her tribe. Well, she was the boss of our tribe. And you can just imagine Sheila's laughing, Frank smiling, all of us independent, pretty powerful people going, whatever Mary says, we do. Talk to that person, we do. She says, think about it that way. Okay. She even had us, fully grown adult people, doing a rap to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Taos Institute. the other piece of Mary that I want to note is what she calls her rosy outlook. She says, my narrative is quite one-sided. I realized with very few mentions of tragedies, insurmountable difficulties, pain, or suffering, but it is also the manner in which I tend to live life. I try to focus on the rosy side, and I forget the bad. This can only sort of point to what I describe as the grand finale of my long friendship with Mary. It came when I received the foreword she wrote to my book, Thriving Women, Thriving World. Mary, feminist, social constructionist, wrote what only Mary Gergen could have written. This book is different. Here is a new approach to feminine issues. Here, a new approach to feminine issues is being fomented. It is not creating adversaries, building barriers, or finding ways to defeat enemies, nor segregating ourselves in the process. It is another way, one that promises more in terms of female equality and more in terms of gender peace. It is not a laying down of arms, a compromise, nor a conciliatory posture that allows the continuation of male dominance. No, it is a new formulation that will enhance the lives of all people, regardless of how they identify as gendered beings, and allow for the possibility that women can advance their goals without destroying men. It occupies a new position in the firmament of feminist offerings. It constructs the world in ways that challenge all that has gone before. That was written to me by Mary. It was Mary writing Mary. I am honored to have you, professor, friend, colleague, Mary Gergen, echo through my heart and my mind. Ubuntu, I am because you are. Thank you all.
Thank you. Should I go next, Art? Oh, no, all of a sudden I can't hear Art.
That's because he's muted. He said yes, though.
Just go ahead. Okay, well, thank you. This is kind of emotional. I see common themes that Art mentions in his intro, that Sheila mentioned, that Diana mentioned. Art mentioned that Mary was fully alive, brought fun, joy, and learning and connection. I want to pick up on the theme that Sheila mentioned about the lack of boundaries, that the personal, professional, and playful came together. Also, Diana's point about how Mary was committed, staying optimistic. There's really no category to capture her. And the only word that comes to mind for me is love. She knew that the way we talk is faithful and that words create worlds, or as Wittgenstein said, what the limits of language are the limits of my world. It's a shame that we only have one word for love, because it misses the nuances in the way that Mary embodied love. And so I went back to do an etymology. And if we go back to the ancient Greeks, they understood it better than us. They had 4 different words for love. There's philia for friendship, agape for universal love, eros for passionate love, and ludus for playful love. Mary was all of those. First, I'll talk about philia, the love between friends. She was a friend to many and a very dear friend to me. She worried about the things that worried me, and she worried about me. A few years ago in September, she called to see how I was doing. I mentioned I was struggling with some things. She suggested I join the family for Thanksgiving. What a magnanimous invitation of friendship to be invited into their inner circle. And I've been blessed to spend 5 of the last 6 Thanksgivings with the Gergen family. They welcomed me as part of their family. And there were gatherings of comfort, laughter, joy, and friendship. And I'm very grateful for that. The other word that the Greeks had was agape, universal love, or love for all. And I think about the quote that Art just offered at the beginning, that she referred to his work as daring, polyvocal work. I think that's a gesture of love for all. It came through in her optimism. in the good feeling she had, the universal love that came through in her scholarship. Her approach to scholarship was always to create pathways of freedom, to remind us that another story is always possible when we get stuck. She reminded us to avoid essential words, to not think of ourselves as fixed monads. We can continue to develop capacities. The transformation is always possible in the context of relationships. In that sense, she never lost her Catholic upbringing. She always believed in redemption. She fought against reductionism, encouraged us to enlarge the spectrum of the ways we engage in relationships, encouraged us to pay attention over the long term, that we become richer and more daring over time in the context of relationships. I've heard her say in her presentations, in her writing, that she wants to keep a rebel spirit alive. I love that phrase, to keep a rebel spirit alive. I think she's doing that even after her death. She wanted to be daring but not foolhardy, and that's what agape is, universal love for all. Her work was an expression of love. It comes through in her commitment to positive aging. She was way younger than her years, which leads to, I think, the next word for love, eros, passionate love. Mary embodied lust and desire and refused to be confined by age. She was at least 30 years younger than actual years, and she would object that I use an essential term like actual years. She embodied the erotic. Sheila even mentioned her modest striptease. Her eros spilled over in the way she expressed her passion. It was in the elegant way she dressed, the refined way she spoke. Check out the colorful clothes she wore, her jackets. She wanted to be seen as a full, vivacious, vigorous, sexy woman. That's how she experienced herself, and it came through. She was playful in a way that was almost flirtatious. And that leads to the last category, ludus, meaning playful love. She was playful, if nothing else. She had a playful spirit until the end. She would leap into things without any guarantee of the outcome, and she loved to tease. She would say, let's try it. She erred on the side of saying yes. I remember one time in particular, she would play around people's comfort level in a way that was provocative. One time, and I think Sheila will remember this, we were at a dinner with a group of about 12 people. She was at one end of the table, I was at the other end, and she found out that I do not like to eat eggs. In front of the entire group, she spent the rest of the dinner playful getting me to try eggs. She ran through a series of thought trials for me to consider. Like, what if you thought of the eggs as steak? Or what if you imagined they were psychedelic properties? Or what if they were a form of candy? She wouldn't let up. I came up with a nickname for her. I called her Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians. And finally, she could be rigorously honest, and I think that was an expression of her friendship. Ken and Mary invited me to visit them in late July of 2020, about 6 weeks before she died. It was risky because we were in the midst of COVID, but they each knew that I wanted to see her, and I'll always be grateful for that invitation. We were hoping that the treatments would work, but I think we knew she was not going to be with us for long. Her energy would come and go. She would frequently have to go and rest, or she'd be quiet for long periods. So I had sent up a writing excerpt for a project I was writing on the Marcellus family. Ellis Marcellus had died, and I wrote sort of a eulogy for him and sent it out to a few people to read. My friends gave me fairly superficial feedback, all of it positive. And then I gave it to Mary, and this is the last day I saw her. She had just read it, and she gave me this look of utter seriousness. And she said, "You didn't say anything about him. You just wrote about everyone else." I was never so happy to receive negative feedback in my life. It was Mary, full of honesty and life and vigor. It was the real Mary. It was my last visit. She was feisty and honest. She was a curious learner until the end, and even after her death, she continues to teach us. She was optimistic until the end, including the way she approached her own death. She said the last day I saw her, "I've had a good life. I've done everything I wanted to do, and everyone has to die eventually." When Mary got sick, I would send her songs I played on the piano, and she loved torch songs. when she would mention a particular song, I would go out and learn it and then send it to her. I would play an excerpt of it, but I'm looking at the time and I'm worried we won't have time. So I think I'll forego that. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. That was wonderful. Ken?
Yes, Art, I'm here.
Okay.
Am I speaking all right?
Yes, I hear you. I think everybody else does too.
First
Even
of all,
I do now, Ken.
I'm sorry.
Even I do now.
You do, fine.
Sorry.
Yay.
I think living with Mary, one learned quickly to expect the unexpected, and that's what I'm doing today. Right now, I am in the hallway between two restrooms in a Hertz renter car office in Palm Beach, Florida.
Oh, my.
I took a very early flight this morning to be sure I could be here on time. I had several hours to spare, but here we got an ice storm when I took off. We did not take off, and so here I am lodged. I don't know who may come through, but I'm certainly glad to be here because I almost wasn't. I thought, first of all, just want to thank my friends. I've learned from you and deeply appreciate what has gone before. I've been touched in significant ways, particularly since all of you have been very close over many, many years. I also wanted to, my own remark, wanted to go back a bit to, well, first of all, start with my scanning this program and dipping in the various symposia here and being overwhelmed with the creativity, with sort of zest, curiosity, expansion, just over a huge range and over a range of countries and so on. It's just enormous what's gone on here. It could not have taken place 20 years ago in anything like this. It's just fantastic. And I somehow feel that if Mary were here, she would be looking at that and smiling with great, great pleasure at what's happened. Because I think to understand indeed what has happened, there's a little bit in the way you have to go back to Mary's life. And if I could preface this by just referring to a little bit of what's gone on before, you have to realize in her life, what you have is an Irish girl who grew up a Roman Catholic as an older sister, who could be forgiven for anything, who was highly verbal, loved to question, to challenge, and so on. That was just part of it, and didn't respect authority too much. One last thing, Saturday afternoon at the movies were the great escape from growing up on the plains of Minnesota. This was like her entry into performance, in my view, an entry into a lifestyle in many respects. So with all of that, you have to realize that this is beginning now to come into academics in her PhD work, where she's going into a social psychology program, which is very empiricist, straightforward measurement, experimentation. And that's in the late 70s and 80s. So we're talking more than 40 years ago. She doesn't want to do that. Why should I do something I don't want to do? She finally got away with a lot of talk into doing a study which was essentially interviewing people and interpreting. Then it was an easy move from that into social construction, which also was a questioning of the dominant paradigm. Now we're talking early 80s, where it begins to be uphill sliding, an uphill challenge. And is already questioning authorities and working on alternative methods of research, because constructionism opened up a space for her, and I think for a lot of people, for imagining alternatives to experimentation, to measurement, to systematic control, and so on. All that, a range of efforts that somehow we have now managed to put behind us. So it's there already. it also led her, and this is again, we're talking 35 years ago, into experiments with writing. So she's already playing around with having dialogues with different pieces of writing and threading that into its own whole. The two of us also experimented with this whole, you might appreciate this for some of you do collaborative autoethnography, of doing a duography where you begin with independent voices, and by the time you pass the 25 years in which we have lived together at that point, you can't tell who's speaking. I just sort of the recounting blends. Anyway, those are the kinds of experiments she was doing. And it begins to become a way which others can identify with, and we begin to find friends. Oh, Laura Richards is one of them. Mark becomes another one. Bochner and Ellis, I mean, and other areas that are just in that same spin. So now we've got dialogues going. But I have to tell you, this is as you mentioned before, yeah, a staunch feminism. This is against the male dominance. But as a feminist, even though one of her best friends was Carolyn, she was a constructionist into the process of deconstructing the sort of objectivity of the feminine. So already that's sort of moving now into postmodern feminism and postmodern theory. All right, so she's now invited to a postmodern theory conference to take input from psychology. And these are all pretty high theory people. But she doesn't want to do high theory. Rather, she does essentially a poetic monologue challenging the macho orientation of a lot of postmodern writing and wearing a boa. In effect, doing a performance at this conference, which was at that point, people took aghast at. It was like, how could you do this? It's not serious work. Well, eventually it got to be serious work, and they reversed the decision to not publish it. They published it, and now that's looked at as a major contribution. I want to say a little bit more about some of the things that Frank and Sheila particularly mentioned. Look, she didn't really cater to people who were puffed up, and particularly males. She didn't like authority figures very much. So she would challenge anybody with any high visibility. I remember once I was at Swarthmore, and for a major talk, I invited B.F. Skinner, and it was a dinner table, and she's down there and sitting next to Skinner. I looked down once in the evening, and she's got Skinner's ear and is pulling it. And what? Oh, there was Ram Hare at another meeting, brought with him the wrong paper. Ram was always in a hurry, and she scolded him in front of the group. How could you do that? There's John Searle, who was a feisty bully in many respects, and we were at another conference in Spain, and she's sitting across the table from him, and I hear her at one point saying, "Oh, if you think I'm crazy, you wait till you meet my husband." She would go on with that. And by the way, she also became interested in performance, partly because gender within that postmodern frame was becoming not an essential category, but something that was performed. That was a very early move, but that began to sow the seeds for performance, for doing performance. So a lot of the early work and onward became performance oriented, and at one point blended in with her feminist concerns and constructionist concerns about growing older. What was it like to grow older? In some sense, I would look at it as a poetic form of autoethnography, but she did a kind of a growing older performance, which went from tears at some point about what it is like to lose the interest, to lose any function in society, and to lose caring eyes and so on as a woman, but then rebelled at it and came out as I don't know whether you showed the picture, with a wig, with ostentatious clothing. She had a cigar in her mouth. She had a hip flask. And at one point she tries to do a striptease to say, look, just show up and dominate, reverse the stereotypes, live it out. Started to do a striptease, where she's trying to take off pantyhose in this public, and some woman in the audience starts to go into an orgasmic sounds. Send the audience into spasms of laughter. Anyway, so I think I want to end on that, because it's also to add a lighthearted moment to this. I mean, I think what has been said here before is just wonderful, and I hope I have to lend my children.
Homenaje a los muertos.
Somebody else is talking, but she would have scoffed a little bit, made a joke of herself, and would want us to have fun with it. So I think on that note, I'd like to continue, not with a tear, but a smile. So thank you so much for organizing this, or I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken. That was just wonderful.
Yeah.
There are others in the audience who probably want to speak, so I'm going to just say, speak up.
All right, I want to speak for a moment. And I want to start by saying, if Mary had been here, there wouldn't have been all these glitches, because she would have made sure we all knew what we were doing and did it right. I always loved Mary's boa, and I don't have a boa, but brought this crazy scarf to put around my neck in memory of Mary. We really had such a good time with her and Ken, as Art said, at ICQI and other places as well. We enjoyed doing all the sessions with Ken and Mary, but we also enjoyed the late night glass of wine, talk about everything that's going on, fix the problems of the world, and figure out the future of the kind of work that we were doing. So I miss her being in the world, and I'm really glad that we get to celebrate her here. Thank you.
Anybody else?
One more thing. I'm really glad that she got Art to clean his glasses. He cleans them every day now. And I'm really happy about that.
Let's see.
She got a lot of us to do a lot of things like that.
You never got me to eat eggs.
Ram Hara used to call her his big sister.
Oh.
Great. Mark, go ahead.
First off, Ken, it's great to see you, as always. And I just wanted to say, in addition to all the wonderful things that have been said about Mary's intellectual life and contribution and her spirit and so on, she was just a terrific dinner partner. And we had occasion, anytime there was something significant that happened in the Society for Qualitative Inquiry and Psychology, we would celebrate, Ken and Mary and Fallon Josselson and me. And the goal was to just have the most fabulous extended dinner and drink fest that we could possibly have over great conversation and laughs. And amidst all the work that we did, that was just an immense pleasure. And I'm grateful for having known her and for our friendship.
How about Cesar? Is he still here? Let me see. Cesar, do you want to say anything?
Hold on. Just, I mean, I'm very glad to be here and see all of you and having these wonderful memories about the lovely, lovely friend. I was just thinking, when was the last time that I was talking with Mary? And you know, I mean, I remember that she was very, very kind with me. The last time I think was in Austria, in Vienna, when we were celebrating the 50 years of the Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman book. And Mary was quite concerned about what happened to my brain, you know, and I was crying because if you remember, I got a very, very hard stuff in my brain, no, and she was quite concerned about if the damage was in the left or in the right part of my brain. And I was quite surprised because as a social constructionist thinker, I mean, thinking on what was happening neurologically in my head was just amazing. I mean, thanks for giving me this opportunity to have these wonderful feelings about our very, very lovely friend. Thank you.
Ken?
Yes.
Hi, Ken.
Hi.
I just want to send all of my empathy and sympathy to you. I know how great your loss is.
Well, thank you. I mean,
Thank you.
you and Mark and my friends here, I could easily weep, but I'm trying not to do that.
Yeah. Mark's comment reminded me of that time in Chicago where you, Ken, and Mary found this restaurant. I don't remember the name of it, but it was probably the most extraordinarily expensive and gourmet restaurant that I've ever been to. And you mainly used your honorarium or whatever it was to take us there. And I don't think I've ever had a longer meal where the waiters came out and explained how every single dish, every single slice of cheese was made and where it originated. And I don't know how many bottles of wine we drank. And the night was just one of my most memorable nights ever at a conference. And it was so full of good cheer and love and companionship and relationship. And it just was, it's even heartwarming to remember it. And then all those, and Carolyn spoke a little bit about this, the walks around the quad in Illinois at Urbana, and how we never planned anything, and we would just like take off, and you never knew what the topic was going to be. And we laughed, and it was just fun. Mary was just absolute joy to be with.
You see, the gourmet meal was sort of a revenge for having to spend 5 days eating in Urbana, Champaign.
That's true.
And Mary, I think we changed our seats 2 or 3 times because Mary wanted to make sure we were in the perfect location and perfectly arranged around the table. And I just love that. She had such good stuff.
Yeah.
And then Carolyn, there is the time that she and Peggy Penn went into the restaurant before we were to have dinner to pick out the table and make sure that we had a round table so that when we arrived, we would all be able to talk with each other.
Yeah.
And I would add that those elaborate dinners, expensive, extravagant, delicious, they are the Taos Institute because of Mary. We can't be together without having a meal like that at least once. Yeah.
Yes, my memory is in Bruges.
Yes, I was thinking Bruges as well as in Belgium, in Brussels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like setting the stage for performance.
Yeah.
You don't
Yes.
have a set. How can you be wonderful?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've come about to the
By the
end of
way, in
our,
that same way, I don't know whether you recognize it, but she had a whole sort of coterie of gay people because she was looked at as kind of fabulous, you know, with boa and so on, the performance. They kind of liked that. So she had this, I mean, she hung with that group in the UK. They had to come into our house. It was like a part of her friend group. But it had that quality of being sort of like that, you know, like a little bit sort of outlandish.
Ken, it is so wonderful to see you and all of you. And I sure hope that you do get up to our neck of the woods. We're not too far from where you are. So put our house on your list of places to visit.
Well, I really appreciate the presence of everyone here. It's very thoughtful. Art, Carolyn, and those who contributed, and those who were just standing here with us. Very much appreciate that.